Hello and welcome to Talking Pictures Presents, the bi-weekly film recommendation podcast. My name is Andrew Furlong. This week I will be taking you through a number of films, most of them good, some bad. It will all be revealed when I start reviewing them, I suppose. The first film I seen this week is a documentary called Finding Vivian Maier. It was directed by John Maloof, and this guy was at a local auction house one day looking for pictures to use for a history book about his neighbourhood. When he came across some old negatives that he became so impressed with, he became determined to find out more about the photographer and her prolific work. And this documentary is a real great look at somebody we would never have heard of, or more importantly, seen the work of if it wasn't for the director, because despite taking over 100,000 images, this street photographer, Vivian Maier, never showed her pictures to anybody. She stored all her pictures away, and they would only be found and make her famous after her death. This woman was an amazing photographer and could really capture people in a very natural, candid way, and is now recognized as one of the greatest street photographers of all time. But at the same time, it's so baffling how she kept her work a secret to everybody, worked as a nanny most of her life, and everyone who knew her had no idea she lived this double life as a woman with a tremendous talent. You can tell from her pictures that she was somebody who really understood the human condition and had a real gift. And as the director uncovers more about Vivian, we have to make our own conclusions as to why she kept her wonderful work private. Finding Vivian Maier unfolds in the same kind of tantalizing way documentaries like The Imposter and Capturing the Freedmans does. I'm not talking about the subject matter, but more in the way you're taken in by the initial hook. Then you're almost like the co-detective of the piece, desperate to find out every nugget of information possible to satisfy your curiosity. Vivian was a seemingly ordinary person with an extraordinary talent whose work could have disappeared into obscurity forever if it wasn't unearthed, and it really makes you wonder what other great pieces of art have disappeared over the years because people didn't share their work, making it lost forever, essentially. I think it's a definite watch, this documentary. It's got a lot of different layers to it. If you love photography, it will probably inspire you, and even if you're not a fan of photography, how the documentary is presented, it would never bore you. It doesn't feel like a long monologue of information like this podcast probably does to some, I suppose. The director interviews her friends and the families she worked for, as well as letting the documentary unfold in a way that makes you feel like you were discovering about Vivian this same time as the director, so it keeps it exciting. So that documentary is Finding Vivian Maier. The next film I will be reviewing is Birdman. Now, I had heard a hell of a lot of buzz about this movie, and I love the concept of this washed up actor played by Michael Keaton, who used to play an iconic superhero but is now a washed up actor, and he kind of battles his alter ego that pretty much seems to be the persona of the superhero he used to play that goes by the name of Birdman. And all this takes place in the lead up to the opening of his new Broadway play. That's all I knew about Birdman going into it. So I was imagining this black comedy where this Batman type superhero influences Michael Keaton's decision in a heroic type of way. What I didn't know about Birdman, and it goes something like this: Goodfellas, Children of Men, Atonement, Before Sunset, Boogie Nights. Think of any long take tracking shot in the history of cinema, and Birdman's entire 119-minute runtime is filled with anything to match that. Edited together to look like a movie that is essentially one take, Birdman is a technical marvel, and despite a very good performance by Keaton and Edward Norton pulling out the best performance in years, playing an obnoxious, difficult to work with actor, basically an over-the-top version of himself, but it is the camera that is really the star of the show. I have never seen anything like this. After a prolonged one-take sequence that would be a masterpiece in its own right, following different characters in the Broadway theatre, Birdman then takes it up a notch and takes the sequence outside onto a busy street without breaking the camera the whole time. It's really something special. And the movie is filled with moments like that. The camera really is the engine of the movie, dictating the pace and the flow of the whole piece, weaving together everything seamlessly. And that will be part of the problem for some with Birdman. It can become an exercise in finding your bearings constantly. Because it's edited to look like one take, sometimes you won't even realise a day has passed until they get to the same rehearsal scene that was due to take place the next day. It can be extremely jarring and will test your attention span beyond belief if you aren't here for the camera work, basically. There's a lot of subtext to Birdman as well, and there is something to be said for a film centering around the days leading up to a stage play being shot like the most extravagant stage play imaginable in its own right, with Michael Keaton as a lead with split personalities. Birdman suggests that in society nowadays, everybody is always giving a performance to some extent, and because of how we process media now and mobile phones, the camera is always on us to some extent anyway. But I just don't know if the plot itself and what Birdman is trying to say will be enough to interest anybody who isn't won over by the wonderful style and technical triumph that is Birdman. It's not like Alfred Hitchcock's movie Rope, where the camera is just a cherry on top of an already great movie. In Birdman, the camera is the movie. I personally loved it, and it is a recommendation, but approach with caution if you're looking for something laid back you can unwind to. It will test you, and it is a movie by a filmmaker for filmmakers, so a lot of people have been baffled by this movie, but despite that, like I said, it's definitely a recommendation for me, and I did really enjoy it.
How famous do you think you are? You are way more famous than any of my friends.
That's okay.
Have you ever heard of The National? They're from here. I'm his brother, and I'm supposed to go on their tour bus.
This is one of the most talked about bands on the planet.
I think I'm gonna get together with them. I'm gonna be making this rock doc.
I do have a brother, but he's more of a metalhead. I think he thinks indie rock's pretentious bullshit.
2 weeks ago, Matt called. He asked if I wanted to go on tour and be a roadie.
I had no idea you'd never been to Europe.
Welcome to Paris. Ooh, this doesn't even look like my arm. It looks like another person in the room when I do this. Who is that? I just want to have fun on tour. I'm with a rock band.
You just need to be careful about not partying. You're not a band member, you're a crew member.
Have you done towels?
Yes.
Water bottles?
Yep.
Everything's cool?
Everything's cool. I need towels and water bottles.
The next film I will be reviewing is a documentary also called Mistaken for Strangers, and in keeping with the tradition of car crash filmmaking and cult characters like Steve Lips-Kudlow in Anvil, the Story of Anvil, or Mark Bochart in American Movie, or even something like the rivalry depicted in something like The King of Kong, Mistaken for Strangers is the natural successor to all of that. It's 75 minutes of one unintentional comic genius moment after another, with a touching relationship between two brothers at the heart of the story. The guy shooting the documentary is Tom Berenger, who just happens to be the younger brother of Matt Berenger, the lead singer of the band The National, who are this really successful indie rock band. They have had a number 3 single in the American charts, made the cover of the Rolling Stones, and basically tour in massive venues around the world and are quite famous. I had never heard of them actually, but that won't detract from your enjoyment of this documentary one bit, because Tom just brings his camera and moonlights as a filmmaker while he's supposed to be there working as a roadie on tour, much to the annoyance of the band members of The National, including his brother. He's really unprepared and doesn't really know what he's doing, but has access to all these great venues and famous band members due to his brother, making for a documentary that Rob Reiner would be proud of. Like, he asked them questions such as, how famous are you, or how fast can you play, or my personal favourite, things like, do you bring your wallet and ID on stage? In another scenario, this could be a comedy starring Jack Black messing up the tour for his brother, played by Damian Lewis, but it's not. This is real footage and real people, which makes the relationship between the two brothers much more enjoyable as well. They couldn't be much more different to each other. Tom is this goofy metalhead who drinks loads and even chastises the National for not being rock and roll enough on tour, while Matt is this superstar, supremely confident, and seems to have this iron will and self-assurance that has led him to success in the first place. And you get a great window into their sibling relationship in Mistaken for Strangers. It's a great look at how one sibling copes when their brother just happens to be currently one of the most successful people on the planet, and what kind of scrutiny that would put on your own life if you had to always compare yourself to that measure of success. Mistaken for Strangers is funnier than most scripted comedies, got a great central character at the heart of the relationship, and you don't have to like the National's music to enjoy the documentary, because I personally hated the music. It sounds like the love child of Chris Martin and Bono to me. But I do recommend the documentary itself highly, so check that one out. The next film I seen this week is John Wick, starring Keanu Reeves, directed by the stuntman of Keanu Reeves, Chad Stahelski. IMDb describes it as a movie starring Keanu Reeves, who plays an ex-hitman who was forced to come out of retirement to track down the gangsters that took everything from him. Actually, they didn't really take everything from him, because his wife has already died of sickness before the film begins. So 3 crooks break into John Wick's house and kill his dog and take his car. So basically, they haven't taken everything from him. They've killed his dog and taken his car. His dog, however, as John Wick will tell you himself, is the only thing that my wife left me to cope with my grief after her death. By taking away the dog, you took away my chance to grieve. So John Wick is extremely annoyed that they killed his dog and took his car. Meanwhile, one of the crooks who took the car, played by Alfie Allen, is not able to sell the car because you just don't take John Wick's car. Alfie Allen turns out to be the son of a big mob boss that John Wick used to work for. This complicates matters a lot when John Wick decides to break the concrete in his basement to get all the weapons he used to have and go on a murderous rampage against his former employer, basically planning on killing every person he comes into contact with because he's so badass. And we know he's a badass not only because he kills people with the consistency of a first-person shooter video game, but also because we are reminded by other characters at all times just how badass and great this John Wick guy really is at his job. We were reminded by his former mob boss, he's so badass, who seems to be scared shitless of him, and tells us John Wick isn't the boogeyman. He's the man you call when you want to kill the boogeyman. We were reminded by John Leguizamo how badass he is because he won't buy John Wick's stolen car. Basically, the whole movie was written by somebody who was in love with a man named John Wick and wanted to express that love in the form of an action movie. Like, the film tries to world build by having everybody know who John Wick is in the underworld, and in particular, this shady hotel where everybody hangs out. We can tell some people have a different, more friendlier relationship with John Wick because they call him Jonathan instead of John. That's very important. The script seems like it was written by a 7-year-old. This is the kind of script I used to have when I played G.I. Joe as a kid. Basically non-existent, making it up on the spot. And although Keanu Reeves is good and the action sequences themselves are pretty good, they're not bad,